and welcome. This is Sunrise Daily. I'm Ayo Makinde.
It is a beautiful Thursday morning from here in Lagos. I'm Kaide Okikele.
Well, just to very quickly remind you of what the figures as yesterday, we got these new figures from the NCDC that says that 284 new cases were confirmed, bringing the total number to 6,677 with 1,840 people discharged, and fatalities have come to 200.
I mean, what's very disturbing, I should say, about the figures is the fact that Lagos alone recorded 199, and that's the highest so far for Lagos. I mean, that's a record high. The last time we had something this high, I mean, close to that region was, I think, 2 weeks ago. It was the 7th of May, and we had, I think, 183. Now 199, and I don't know if it's related to the easing of the lockdown, because that started over 2 weeks ago.
Or perhaps related to the number of tests being conducted in Lagos.
But one thing is sure, this is not what we want to be seeing, but here we are right now.
Anyway, just to keep you updated and to also continually remind us that we have, every single one of us, to take responsibility. Of course, government has continued to give us figures, and if you go to the handles of the Lagos State government, they would give you the breakdown per local government. You know, the local governments with the highest, infection rates, and the ones with the lowest, and things that we all need to do. They're all there, all over the place. And please, in the event that you know some people who do not know what to do, please advise them, because it is important for us all to take responsibility where it's necessary. Well, we have joining us for a look at the papers this morning, Mr. Dayo Akintobe, who is the publisher of TCN. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, so of course, those figures, I don't know if you want to say a thing or two, first of all, before we jump into the papers. Some people would say it is scary. And of course, in some other parts of the world, it's a lot worse. But one death at any time is one death too many.
Yes, indeed. These numbers, this escalation is not unexpected. A function of greater testing, a function of the fact that the lockdown has been eased, and there's a lot more person-to-person interaction. As a result, it was inevitable that we would see this escalation over time. I think the numbers are still actually quite manageable when you compare them to what's happening in the rest of the world. I don't think there's any cause for undue alarm or panic by way of the escalation. I think there's a bit of geometric progression in the way the numbers are escalating. There's no massive quantum surge. It's increasing at a measurable pace, which makes it more manageable.
Well, it's also very interesting, Kaudi, that this is the highest for Lagos, but it's not the highest overall. We had 340 something.
If you take a look at FCT's figures, FCT had, I think, about 8. And FCT and Lagos, they were like, tally. Now it's Kano. So I think it's increasing for Lagos, but if you go to some other parts, it seems it is decreasing. But then you pointed to testing. I mean, the NCDC released number of tests done, I think it was 3 days ago, per state. And you see some states actually conducted 7 tests, some 50, some 58, some just 1, according to the NCDC. So, I think it's also a function of testing.
Of the testing that we do. Okay. Well, we'll get more of that on the conversations, as conversations progress today. But let's begin with the Guardian newspaper. This one says, why governments may lose COVID-19 battle. That's according to the United Nations. Police provoke doctors' wrath over brute enforcement of curfew. Journalists, others on essential duties exempted, says the Inspector General of Police. And Catholic body, FCT, differ on reopening of churches and mosques. Which one of these catches you?
Well, the Inspector General's issue with the journalists and other essential workers yesterday was actually quite interesting. By and large, because the curfew was extended another couple of weeks, a directive went out saying that this curfew should be enforced as a means of trying to keep the numbers down. And so the IG took that as a gospel and sent out word that the curfew should be strictly enforced. Due to some sort of lack of communication or breakdown in communication or misinterpretation of the instructions, essential workers were excluded. So at 8 o'clock, day before yesterday, everything got shut down, including essential workers, everybody, nobody could move. So of course that caused a major uproar because you've got medical personnel who are reporting to work, you've got those who have just got off their shift who are just going home, you've got journalists who are rushing to the newsroom to go and submit their stories, and all of them are caught in this blockade, which started from 8 o'clock, and of course a major uproar. So eventually I think word got to the IG and calls went all over the place. About 11 o'clock, he eventually issued a release, 11 p.m. saying, let essential workers through. But of course, by then there was already a logjam and there was a backlog. And how do you now begin to separate the essential workers from those who are just in violation of the curfew, who are non-essential? So it created a major ruckus. But here's what now happened. They now give this blanket order, let essential workers through. Yesterday, the police now overcompensated, and at lockdown at 8 o'clock yesterday, everybody was moving freely, because I guess they were now gun shy from the overreach of the day before.
You know, it's quite interesting because people have said it's either we go extreme or not enough. As much. And I looked through the guidelines for this gradual easing, and I didn't see anything about, curfew, also including essential workers. And it was curious, how did this now come up, suddenly? You say maybe that was miscommunication, but I mean, there was a document of reference, and there was nothing like that there. So is that still miscommunication?
Well, remember, we are in uncharted waters here. We're dealing in situations that we've never had to deal with before. So people are making their best judgments on the fly. As things are happening, we are reacting. So it's quite possible that at the moment those guidelines were being drafted, people thought it was commonsensical that essential workers would be allowed through. Maybe they didn't think it was necessary to specify. And as a result, it was just taken for granted. Unfortunately, the police interpreted it to the letter.
You read between the lines.
To the letter.
But could it also be as a result of the finger pointing over the weekend into this new week that the police were the ones dropping the ball? And consequently, they then say, okay, you think so?
We're going to hold on to that ball.
Yes, there has to be some degree of sensitivity. So if you're accusing me of not having held up my responsibility or held up to my own end of the deal, I will look at where the flaws are and I will adjust. So yes, they may have over-adjusted to the detriment of essential workers.
But then there's that major headline that says governments may lose COVID-19 battle, according to the UN. Apparently, the United Nations is indicating that, look, we need to retain the trust and participation of citizens throughout. How much of that do you see us, especially in our part of the world, how much of that do you see us doing?
It's when you look at situations like medical practitioners downing tools overnight into today, it gives you a bit of concern that we're getting to a situation where we can say we're at the peak of this outbreak in this part of the world. And this is the time where there's a concerted effort required on the part of government, on the part of citizens, on the part of medical workers. Everybody needs to pull together at this point in time. Even us as individuals, we need to be responsible, which you said at the beginning of the show. We need to maintain social distancing. We need to wash hands. We need to follow all the preventive measures. Government itself, every government is doing the best they can because they also have to balance political considerations. Look at the end of Ramadan coming now. You see different governments saying, well, we have certain obligations to our citizens. A lot of them are agitating to go for end of Ramadan prayers. So some governments, especially in the north, are now considering easing the lockdown, allowing religious gatherings. I read somewhere this morning that one state is going to allow up to 200 people to gather in religious places. They're going to ease their lockdown to allow up to 200 people. Now, on the one hand, medically, you'd look at that and say, that is very risky at this point in time. But you have other states who are now contemplating a full lockdown. So you run the entire gamut. You have the entire spectrum of various interventions based on personal perception of the powers that be. And you just have to believe in their judgment that they have certain research, they have certain information we're not privy to, and you have to just believe that they know what they're doing and they're doing what they consider to be best.
I'm looking for a place to put that in my brain, but let's let's leave that for now.
Okay.
Right under the pictures you see on the front page of The Guardian, Buhari, APC under fire over alleged 48 billion naira ministry scam. PDP, others seek probe into allegations. Groups fault move against PermSec. Contractors picket office over 17 billion naira debts. What do you make of this?
That's a big story. That's a very big story because it speaks to the issue of corruption in government. In 2018, some contracts were awarded through the Ministry of Agriculture to some contractors. My understanding of the procurement process is before any contract is approved and signed, the money has already been allocated. There's a budget for it. So the money is already put aside. The only reason they're not giving it to you is so you can complete, they're not giving it to you fully, is so there can be some degree of accountability. So they mobilize you, you go get the job done, you borrow the money even if they don't mobilize you, then you come with a performance certificate that shows that you've actually completed the job. You submit that, and they should just go and get the money where it was and pay you. Turns out now that these people have completed the job, and all of a sudden the money that was allocated for these jobs,
That was supposed to be sitting somewhere.
that was supposed to be sitting somewhere, is nowhere to be found because they haven't been able to pay these people since 2018. So the question is, where did the money go? Now, back in 2018, I believe the Minister for Agriculture back then was Audu Ogbe, who got a lot of kudos for doing quite a lot in the agricultural sector and championing food security and a lot of the things we see today in terms of we're growing our own rice and we've got a lot more local production of food. Much of it is credited to him. And so it's a bit befuddling that under his watch, something like this would happen. And it's also even gives more consternation that the Buhari regime, whose ticket, whose overriding theme is anti-corruption, would allow, that something like this would come to the fore under their tenure. I think the president needs to look seriously into this. I think he needs to perhaps set up a committee and let them investigate it. If it gets to the point that the contractors are picketing the office of the ministry and refuse to leave until they were addressed by either the permanent secretary or the minister himself, and they all had documents to credibly show that they were owed this money, I think it stinks, and I think some deep investigations need to be done.
So many questions arise there, especially when you look at, first of all, the TCN, TSA as an instrument of the fight against corruption, and of course the Auditor General's report of so many years over and over again, a lot of lapses, and no one has been able to really do anything decisive about it. Definitely, there are so many questions to ask. On the back page is Guardian Sports. Sports Ministry denies Redknapp for Eagles rumor. Hector Cooper worried by NFF's new romance with Raw. Well, and along with other stories you'll find on the back page.
You know what is quite interesting? On one hand, we're talking about the renewal of a contract with the current Super Eagles coach. And, you know, on the other hand, we're saying there are plans to actually get another coach for the Super Eagles.
It begs the question, really, who are the people that benefit from these contracts? I don't know. Do you know?
I wasn't going to talk about the benefits, really, but now that you bring it up, big question.
That's
right
the
there.
Guardian this morning.
Let's take a look at the Nigerian Tribune. The big story, 60 million face extreme poverty, as according to the World Bank. And this, of course, is concerning COVID-19. It talks about the pandemic and the shutting down of economies. And I recall yesterday we had that conversation about life, livelihood, and liberty. Apparently, this is threatening livelihood, which will eventually threaten life. And, you know, people have been saying maybe livelihood should be given, more attention because it also affects life. And some have said life should be given more attention because it affects livelihood. Do you think we've really gotten a way out of that quagmire?
Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? You look at it and you say life is as important as livelihood. It takes livelihood to support life, but you have to have life to be able to generate a livelihood. Yeah. So there's a delicate balancing act that you have to look at. And at the end of the day, each one deserves equal attention. You can't focus more on one to the detriment of the other because at the end of the day, then you lose both. So I would say if we're looking at 60 million Nigerians facing poverty.
And this is even worldwide.
Worldwide. Well, the numbers in Nigeria right from the beginning in terms of those living below the poverty line has always been horrendous anyway. a grossly disproportionate number of our people are already poor. Now imagine what COVID-19, the economic effect it will have on poverty lines. The middle class in this country is virtually non-existent. You're either rich or you're poor. And what you now find is that a lot more of those who are in the upper echelons are beginning to fall below because there's no work, they're getting laid off, there's retrenchment, companies are still closed, factories are not manufacturing, we're not able to import anything at this point in time. So yes, it portends grave fall from grace, from economic grace for a large proportion of the population.
But there's this saying now that is gaining traction that money has not stopped flowing. It has only changed direction. Do you think there's any credence to that?
No, money has stopped flowing. If you look at every facet...
You can tell.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. We're out in the trenches every day as journalists. We're mixing with people. We're observers of the human landscape. On a daily basis, all we do is observe people's behavior and motivation. And from being in the trenches with every aspect of society, we see that money not only has not changed hands, it's just simply not flowing at all.
So there goes that saying. In case you see it on social media next. Well, more stories on the front page. Police intimidation, just right under that big picture. I don't know if you can see it behind that bar. NMA directs doctors to leave official duty by 4 p.m. Now, that's NMA at the national level. But see this one. Lagos doctors begin sit-at-home protest. So apparently, Lagos is saying, well, we're not even going to work at all. It's on page 25, and I think you referenced that this is not the time we want to see something like this. And you see more riders. We have resolved the issue, Labour Minister, as IGP asks AIG's CPs to ensure free movement for essential workers. It's essential to point out to that saying about essential workers, and we really hope that we measure it well. So it's not just open the gates for everybody to go. We measure it very well.
It's really, as Mr. Redknapp said, it's a little dicey because there's always a backlog. For instance, this morning there is a backlog on there was a backlog on the streets before the roads were open for everyone to move around. And then in the nights there is that backlog even before whatever it was that happened. In the light of the IGP's directive. So it begs the question again: how do we begin to sieve?
Your ID card?
When there are 10 people who are not supposed to be on the roads in front of me?
This is obviously an inconvenience that comes with the times, and we just hope to find a better way to handle it. But let me just quickly run through some more stories. Nationwide blackout looms as electricity workers threaten strike.
Wait a minute.
Yes, there was the
TCN.
The MD of TCN was sacked or was relieved of his position. And they're now protesting. They say basically there's a tug of war between the Minister for Power and the MD of TCN. And it relates to contracts. It relates to allocation of money. The workers are saying he's a good person. He's increased worker welfare. He's helped power generation. They have kudos for him. But first of course, he's a member of their union anyway. But then the Minister of Power is saying, well, look, your performance level and certain issues step aside. So I think that's natural friction between unions and those who run the agencies.
Really, a lot of stories. More workers of Ibadan firm test positive for COVID-19. That's been quite, shocking, especially yesterday where there was a conversation about where the company is located. Is it in Ibadan Southwest local government or Northwest local government? Is the governor telling the truth or not? But apparently it came out that that company is actually on just the borders between both local governments. But you know what? It's on page 3 of the Nigerian Tribune. Find out more details. That's the Nigerian Tribune this morning.
And the Daily Trust newspaper leads with, well, definitely COVID-19 related. National Assembly committees begin consideration of revised 2020 budget today. And Senate President of the Senate is promising that Salah break will not affect passage. January-December timeline achievable. That's according to an expert. You may want to find out which of them that is. The story is on page 5. Are you comfortable? Are you confident as well that we're going to do well with this budget?
I think so. I think the fact that they even have the presence of mind to say our revenue has dropped, so the previous budget expectations cannot be met. So let's look and let's cut our coat according to our cloth at this point in time.
Okay.
Let us revise the budget. I think the fact that they even looked at it, recognized the fact that something needs to be done, and they're now sitting to deliberate to see where can we cut? Where can we cut? The initial budget was based on oil at $50-something a barrel. Today's $20. So there's a vast gulf between what was expected and the reality
there are
of
still
today.
questions about whether or not some other recurrent expenditure will be cut, but we'll leave that for another day.
Okay.
There's this one that you mentioned, you referenced earlier,
Yes.
and it's on the bottom strip. Two stories actually, they're related. On one says, Kano Ulamas oppose lifting ban on congregational prayers. And right next to it is Northern governors worried over rising COVID-19 cases. Now, so both of them seem to be saying, you know what, should we even be talking about easing the lockdown now? Yet, just as you said, some people are already considering, easing the lockdown for prayers. That's a little troubling.
The statistics show that the total number of cases in Nigeria now, the North has 70-something odd percent. And the new cases that are coming out every day, the North has a preponderance versus the South. So there is a problem in the North. The outbreak is more acute. So governors definitely are worried. And that's why you see that headline there, that they're looking at it. But they also have to balance it with their constituents who are saying, we want to go and pray. How?
Shouldn't you be alive to pray?
Yes, you should.
Okay.
But I think what's coming out here is we have to learn how to live with this virus. It doesn't look like it's going away quickly.
Okay.
So we have to learn how to live with it and make the kind of adjustments that will allow life to continue while still taking necessary precautions.
Okay. Well, that's the Daily Trust newspaper today.
Let's run through the Vanguard quickly. Fresh crisis brews in APC over Ondo, Edo governorship polls. Apparently, politics is not taking a break.
No, there's a new acting Secretary General of the APC. Mm-hmm. People are up in arms and have kicked that they don't want him, or that there was some sort of subterfuge in his selection. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden that's now having an impact on, because you see, the executive at the party level determines how the primaries will go. At the moment, they're saying there will be direct primaries in Edo and Ondo. Let us not forget the Ambode saga. It was direct primary that led to his being sidelined. So there's a lot at stake for both parties in the upcoming elections in both states.
So one thing is sure, COVID-19 is not really affecting the livelihood or the life of politics. Right here, APC now lawless, those are the writers, says Deputy National Chair. Kore's Bolama's appointment says party risks losing in Edo and Ondo. A couple of other stories. But you see that one about the TCN protest rocks Abuja Oshobo over sack of TCN MD and CEO. And this one trended yesterday. Buhari sacks Uwakwe as NECO registrar for others. It was trending on social media mainly because a lot of people that write these examinations are there. It's on page 8 of a Nigerian Tribune. I wish we could really dive into this.
I mean the Vanguard newspaper?
What?
You mean the Vanguard newspaper, not the Nigerian Tribune?
Oh, pardon me.
We understand.
Thank you.
All right, very quickly, let's look at the leadership newspaper this morning. It also, of course, definitely will have one thing or the other related to what we're talking about, and that's breakthrough as China develops COVID-19 drug without vaccine. Story is on page 4. Well, first of all, what do you make of that? Is that a glimmer of hope for you?
Yes, I would say so. At this point, any which way we can get to arrest this pandemic.
What would you say to those who say, okay, so you, China, you brought the infection to the whole world. Now you're coming with you want to benefit from the sales of the drugs as well?
Well, if you balance that with the fact that people are scared that Bill Gates' vaccine is coming to come and turn us into robots and coming to come and subjugate us into modern day slavery, if somebody is saying, I'll treat you without a vaccine, there's a whole body of people, a whole school of thought that will say, as long as it's vaccine free, I'm game for it. Because they've demonized this notion of vaccination to the point that we're paranoid.
And also joined that to 5G. I wonder where that came from. Well, right below that one, you find that story as well. Governor Sule and Autumn broker peace between herders and farmers. This is an ongoing conversation for so many years. Let's just hope that this indeed is the final nail on the coffin of this unrest. Well, we'll have to thank you very much, Mr. Dayo Akintobi, for your time this morning. He's editor of TCN. Thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And that's the much we can take of the papers this morning. We're back in a moment. Please stay with us. Well, it's as you see, Chamberlain. We got this interesting mail from Matthew Moregbe. Says, I'm looking to get some answers to a pressing question that has been bugging me for a day now. I listened to the Minister for Foreign Affairs during the COVID-19 Nigeria press briefing of Monday, 18th May. He explained how he had to reach out for support from the CBN governor and GMD of NNPC in providing feeding and accommodation for Nigerian returnees who have to be placed in isolation for 14 days on evacuation back to Nigeria as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This became necessary because some Nigerians had faulted the government for asking returnees to pay for the evacuation flights, as well as feeding and accommodation for the period of their isolation on returning to Nigeria. The question whether government should be responsible for their feeding and accommodation on returning to Nigeria is subject to debate. I believe many people will have different views on that. However, what baffles me is the response from the CBN governor and GMD of NNPC, who have, quote, graciously agreed to foot the bills for feeding and accommodation for the hundreds of returnees from all over the world without recourse to any board, assembly of authority. This cost will run into hundreds of millions of naira and possibly up to R1 billion naira. That is power. Now my question, does the Nigerian system allow these people to do this with the stroke of a pen? Is the money intended for this purpose not part of the Nigerian commonwealth, which should be spent diligently? However good intention this may be, could it not give room for possible abuse? Well, that's just asking. That's Matthew Omarebe. But the part there about Nigerian commonwealth, they are Nigerians, right?
Well. First of all, good morning, everyone. We haven't checked to see if it was done with a stroke of a pen in the first instance. So maybe up until we check that, then we may take that conversation from there. But, a lot of things are happening at the same time. They're trying to juggle the ball. Yeah. And so it may not appear different. It's one thing to want to communicate a particular message. It's another thing to see how does it get to the people. How do they internalize the messages that the authorities are trying to communicate to them?
I think that's the important thing, the communication part. Let what you say be what you intend to say so that people do not add meanings to it, because that street called Twitter.
You know the tricky part. So last week, 2 weeks ago, there was a talk about why can't Nigeria foot the bills of people coming? Nigerians that are stranded abroad. People were saying other countries are doing it, even though, you find out that, not all countries are doing it. A lot of them actually ensure that their citizens pay. So that was about 2 weeks, 1 week ago. And this announcement came, and then a lot of people said, really, at this time? We need palliatives. Give us palliatives. It's always going to be, that's the issue with government. You can't please everybody, but I think he raised major issues. So until we check, like Chamberlain said, we can't exactly be sure how much it will cost, how this was done. So we'll definitely try to find out that.
But all eyes still will be on NCDC for a number of reasons.
We'll always be on NCDC.
So there you go. In fact, we've got the DG of NCDC joining us this morning, Dr. Chikwe Iheko Azuvara. Good morning, Doctor. Thank you for joining us today on the program. We were just wondering how long this will be with us for, given all the warnings, summaries, everything coming from different countries, different bodies, different organizations, WHO inclusive. As a matter of fact, now, some dailies did report this morning that governments may lose this fight against COVID if they don't get the trust, support of citizens. And then you just wonder, is this apt given how things are playing out in the country? Doctors asking their members, sit at home, essential services, confusion about who should go, how should they be, doubt about whether or not there's COVID. How are you handling all this?
So good morning, Chamberlain and your team. And yeah, I think what is playing out really goes to the heart of what we have been saying at the Presidential Task Force at NCDC for so many weeks, that we can't win this on our own. We've got to get everyone taking responsibility. It sounded just like a catchphrase, but it's a lot more than that. It's a lot more than that. We have to have an all of society response to this and continue. You can imagine how hard it is for all of us. Every morning we've been working on this for the past 5 months. And we can't stop because it's our responsibility to keep going. But, we really need everyone on the table. There's no easy solution. I can't force doctors to work. They have to want to. And for them to want to, society has to treat them with respect and with love and with appreciation for the very hard work they're doing. But I also see how difficult it is for law enforcement officers because they have to stand out on the roads. And we know Nigerians, we know how many people pretend to be essential workers just in order to drive out at night. So it's very difficult for the law enforcement officers to separate the actual essential workers from the non-essential workers that just are looking to break the curfew. So there are no easy solutions across board on this. And so we as a society have to come together and to understand that our existence really depends on how we can engage with these measures in a safe way. We're no longer talking about continuing the lockdown forever. All of us are planning on how can we reopen safely. But for that safe reopening to happen, we have to come together and find ways to do it. Walking into the Channel studio last week, my temperature was tested at the gate, tested again at the entrance. I was given sanitizers at 2 or 3 points. The sitting arrangements had changed. This is one organization. Now, of course, it's easier in a well-organized, structured organization like Channels. But how do we do that in the markets? How do we do that on our streets for law enforcement, in our hospitals? How do we start trying to do this in schools, for aviation, for churches, for mosques? How do we do this for the ladies selling food on the market side? So it's not easy. And the instructions can't all come from NCDC. There's no way we can be prescriptive to how the entire society will open. So I was really excited yesterday when we got a long memo from the Union of Interstate Travel Organizations. So all the big bosses, right? ABC and the rest of them came together. They had drafted guidelines on how to reopen safely. They then sent these guidelines to us to vet and help them analyze, make contributions, and send back. That was probably the highlight of my day yesterday because it showed that our message was getting through, and this organization on their own had come up with a way to organize their businesses and the structure and how people buy tickets, how people enter their buses and transit, and are now asking us for input. And really, this is what has to happen across society in Nigeria. We have to reopen the country, but we have to reopen safely. And to do this will take sacrifice. It will take sacrifice from all of us. Leaders, as we go into the Salah break, it will take sacrifice from us sending our kids to school. It will take sacrifice from all of us, but it's the only way to get this country moving again, but moving safely into the future.
And how we internalize all of these messages are very important to the scheme of things and how we move forward. For instance, talk to this, if you will. Now, they see these videos. Lots of people see videos of some people who are said to be in isolation center and then carrying on because I think people have a certain impression of how people in isolation center should conduct themselves. So when they see something contrary, like maybe they're dancing to music and just such kinds of videos, they, to some extent, question whether or not these things should be the way they are. Talk to us about it, because some just wonder that lets other people spread messages which will counters the fact that we need to understand how this virus is, what we've seen so far, and how we should trust the government, the messages, particularly when some of them question, as a result of the video they've seen, whether or not there's COVID. I know you have spoken about this several times, but it keeps coming back out there.
So, Chamberlain, there are two things, and I think it's very important for Nigerians to understand why people are actually being put in this sentence. Normally, you only go into a hospital when you're ill. And so when you're physically ill, you go in, you get a diagnosis, and then sometimes you're admitted into a hospital if you're very ill. So you're only then admitted if you're very ill physically. In this case, following the experience from other countries, we made a decision as a country to also put people in isolation centers, not just because they're ill on their own, but in order to stop them from transmitting this virus to others. And this is the experience we got from China very early on in their outbreak, when they did use similar measures to control spread, and many other countries have done that. Now, it's very difficult, and there's been a lot of backlash because people in these centers are often not as clinically ill as you would think a hospitalized patient should be. And, it was the same thing in China. It's just that our context is different. When I traveled there, I think it was in late February or early March, things were organized for people in these places so that they could exercise, and dance routines were practiced, because it's not easy to be somewhere in isolation for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and sometimes more, when you're not ill. So these are things that we now have to use ourselves to reassess our decisions. But right now, that's the decision. As new science is emerging, and there have been a couple of papers that have come up over the last few days that we are assessing at the moment, to try and define better, especially the duration of stay. How long do people really need to stay, even if they remain positive on tests, which is what has happened in some of these instances. So, the other thing, so finally, just to end on that point, it's very difficult for people to stay in hospital when they're not clinically ill, and we understand that. But the last point I want to make on this is, one, it's very difficult to make decisions based on one viral video, right? One WhatsApp video doesn't represent the experiences of people across the country. It's very important that as leaders, we're not pushed down a decision path because one video happens to go viral. Many people are in these centers around the country. They are complying, they're doing their very best, because they understand the responsibility they have, not just to us, but to their own families. If you take this virus out into the community, the people you're most likely to infect are those that you love the most. They are your family, your friends, your work colleagues, the people you interact with. So across the country, 95% or so understand why they have to be in treatment, understand why they have to be in isolation, and are complying. So I don't want us to be forced down a decision path because two people managed to do a great video that spreads virally. And that's the responsibility of leadership across the country.
In how these cases are coming in. I mean, Lagos alone recorded 199 cases. That's a record for Lagos. And we've heard time and again talks about the possibility of our healthcare system being overwhelmed. In fact, Lagos was saying that in the coming weeks, maybe some of his cases will be at the primary healthcare centers. In some other countries, we've seen that, people with mild to moderate symptoms actually stay at home. They don't get, admitted into hospitals except when it becomes severe. Now, seeing this trend, is it possible that we might review our protocol? So on one hand, we don't overwhelm our healthcare system, our practitioners don't get overwhelmed, and maybe we'll even handle some of these issues that have come up. Is there a possibility that we'll review that protocol?
It's absolutely possible. In fact, we've already started thinking about it. And this is why with this virus, there are no easy decisions, right? There's a school of thought that says, listen, Nigeria is such a complex place. People live in high density parts of many cities that home isolation is almost impossible in cities like Lagos, in Kano, because of the living conditions of people. On the other hand, our treatment centers are full, and we don't want to keep filling them up with people that are asymptomatic, because when you then have patients that are ill and require hospitalization, you can't find bed spaces because they are occupied by people that are asymptomatic who you are admitting for public health purposes. So in an ideal world, we would like to admit everyone, which is what China did. But we don't live in an ideal world by any stretch of imagination in Nigeria. So these are the decisions that we have to make at the Presidential Task Force every single day. We try to make the best decision for that point in time while looking into the future. And so absolutely, we are looking at these policies at the moment, not because we want to change policy, but because we are forced to change policy. We have to be reactive to the reality of this virus, the challenges it places. So you expect leadership to be flexible when it comes to hard decisions that we have to make. But this will only succeed if Nigerians support. So if we say we have to do a home isolation, or we are forced to do it, and you come to a home where there are 2 bedrooms or 1 bedroom, how do you do that home isolation? It means everyone else has to sacrifice by leaving the home for some time to live somewhere else. And we can't force that to happen. The family will have to make that sacrifice. And they will have to do it on their own, because we can't go around evicting people from their homes. And that's why I keep coming back to this role of individuals and societies in enabling the response happen. It's the only way we can move forward, because as we change policy, there are implications, and what happens to the victims of those implications depends on how society responds to them. Do we rise up and offer them accommodation in our homes? Or do we say, no, listen, you're a brother of someone with COVID-19, I don't want you anywhere close to me? And those are the individual decisions that will lead to our ability to control this outbreak or not.
Well, I don't know if you have enough time to respond to this one before we take a break, but let me just begin it, and then maybe after the break you can continue, land on the thoughts. Now, you've raised a number of issues, of one of which, from your response to Chamberlain's question about people who are in isolation and who are not looking or feeling sick. We even saw some dramatic examples from some northern states who are even doing push-ups just to show that, look, we are in isolation, but we are not feeling sick. I just want to ask, so far, we have 4,637 active cases, and 1,840 people have been discharged, and we have, unfortunately, 200 fatalities. I just want to find out, what is the turnaround time, duration for COVID-19 from the time people who have been taken to the isolation center have been gotten there and the time there is an outcome, whether it's a discharge or an unfortunate fatality? Because one would expect perhaps that maybe we'll have a lot more people that have been discharged, before the outcome, But please take this on board. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'd like you to respond to it. Please take it. Well, thanks for staying with us. Dr. Ihekweazu, so we've had a situation where some people say, you know what, I only spent 10 days at the isolation center. Some said they only spent just about 2 weeks. What's the average turnaround time? And some would expect that maybe we should have a fewer number of people in isolation centers all over the place now.
Yeah, thanks, Ayo. You were breaking off a bit, but I think you were asking about the duration of hospitalization. The average duration of hospitalization that we've found on our patients has been 10, 11 days. Some have stayed as have been discharged on the 4th day, a few people. There are also extremes that have stayed over 30 days. I think the longest that has been discharged on record right now is about 38 days, but we have patients already that have stayed longer than that. So that number will change once they're discharged. So that's the situation, but the average duration of hospitalization is 11 days to be precise.
A reason for the variety, and is there anything people can do on their own? Because as you have told us often, if you are not showing symptoms, you don't need to be taken to the isolation center. So what should people do when they're at home, while in isolation at home?
Well, I haven't said that you shouldn't be taken to the isolation center if you don't have symptoms. At the moment, our policy is once you test positive to isolate you in the isolation centers to prevent transmission to others. So what you should do, and once you're in the center, is follow whatever your clinical managers instruct you to do. Take the medicine they give you, do what they ask you to do. NCDC doesn't manage patients. There are lots of stories out there about NCDC holding patients. We don't actually manage any patients. We support clinicians with guidelines, with science. We update this as necessary from time to time. And based on this, they make the decisions they need to make on the management of patients. So the discharge criteria at the moment is a single negative test in Nigeria. We used to do 2 negative tests 48 hours apart, but because of challenges of bed space and capacity, we reduced that to a single negative test and then discharged the patient to another 1 week of home isolation so that we can just be sure that you're not shedding the virus. So that's the policy at the moment. As science evolves, as our understanding evolves, we might change this into the future. But for now, there are many reasons why people shed the virus or remain positive longer than others. It depends on how much virus they've, and the circumstances that they got infected in, their own immunity, their own body's ability to fight off this virus. That's why some people get very sick and some don't get as sick. So these are all the variables that come into play to determine how long you remain positive on PCR and therefore how long you remain in hospital. But as knowledge evolves, and that's one thing I've been very open about, we're learning every day. So as knowledge evolves, there'll be new guidance, and as new guidance comes, we will translate that very quickly to adapt it into the Nigerian condition and circumstance to make sure that we are on top of things. We don't want to keep patients. Nigerian hospitals, there's no reason why they should keep patients in care for long durations of time, other than in the best interest of the patient and in the best interest of everyone else in the population.
All right, so 3 weeks ago, you told us about the lab testing group responding to the outbreak, talking about testing, 2 million people in 3 months, and 3 weeks after, we barely scratched the surface. What's going on with that?
So, Chamberlain, right now, we're testing about 2,000 a day, plus minus. We're testing all the samples that come to the network of labs that we support. Remember, the labs are across the country. In the National Reference Lab here in Abuja, no sample stays till the next day. Every single sample that comes in that day is the results either come out that day or very early the next morning. So we're testing every sample that comes through. This is the same across all the labs in our network. There haven't been any stockouts of reagents recently. We're maintaining that supply chain. The labs are ready to go. The reagents we've been expecting, many of them are arriving this week, some next week. So right now, the challenge is on the states to collect more samples, send them to the labs, enable us to do the testing we need to do to inform the outbreak response across the country, while maintaining the case definition that we've offered. So that's where we are. When I say we will test 2 million, what I mean precisely, the country will have the ability to test 2 million people in 3 months. If that target is met, depends on many parts of the chain. Who's collecting the sample, the appropriate collection, sending it to the labs. But in terms of the lab's capacity, we are ready to do a lot more. The lab is keen to go. They've organized themselves in shifts. They're working around the clock. So we're happy with the evolution of our laboratory capacity. We just need the rest of the system to work better to get in the samples from the right people into the labs to enable the testing happen.
But, looking at the figures, really, because you talk about the average daily now being 2,000, but as at May the 19th, 1,332 tests were conducted. A day before that, it was 916. A day before that, it was 1,375. The day before that, that's May the 16th, it was 1,028. So we'll see that over time, we've not even hit 1,500, talk more of 2,000. And I know you've talked about logistics, some of the challenges you've had, and people have always pointed to, our neighbor saying, how about we try pooling? So, these challenges still remain. Obviously, we don't seem to be nearing that target of 1 million, 2 million in the next few months. So really, what are we expecting to change? What help do you need? Maybe I should put it that way. What help do you need right now?
So the help we need is for people to collect the right samples from the right patients and get them to the labs through the system. Listen, we're testing every sample we get. So when you see that we've tested 1,200 samples, those are the samples we got on that day. So we're not going to manufacture samples in order to meet some fictitious target, right? The targets we've set for ourselves are in terms of the capacity that we have. But the actual throughput depends on the system, people collecting the samples from the right individuals. We've published the number of samples collected across every state in Nigeria. We've offered the country that data publicly on our website. So please, I think people should interrogate the parts of the system, the states that are not collecting the samples through which the diagnosis has been made. But on our side at NCDC, with the support of the entire federal government, our partners, our friends, the private sector, we continue to build up our test capacity. The pooling happening in Ghana, people need to understand what this pooling actually means. Pooling literally means you take samples from 10 people, you put them in one container, you test that container, and if it contains the virus, then you have to go back and retest the 10. But if it doesn't contain the virus, you can consider the 10 as having tested and come out negative. Now, pooling doesn't make any sense where there's established community transmission. So if you take our positivity rate at the moment in Lagos and Kano is over 15%, it's around 20%, 15 to 20%, depending on the day, of all samples we collect turn out to be positive. So it means that if we pool our samples together to test, in most cases, we will have to go back and retest the 10. So we've done all this analysis. It doesn't make sense in our context. Our responsibility and role is not to copy foolishly. It's to understand our context and do the right thing. So we continue to scale our test capacity. We've worked extremely hard. I mean, I give so much kudos to lab workers, and lab scientists, microbiologists, virologists across the country that have worked, I don't know how much to say it, to build up their work, to make sure that we achieve the turnaround times that we need to. They've received a lot of criticism. They've risen up to this criticism and driven their response. So the labs are ready to test more. The labs are good to go. My challenge now is for the rest of the system to join us in this battle. But however, remember, my last point on this, testing is not a magic bullet. Right now, we need to accommodate the people that come out positive. We need to enforce and ensure that we're carrying out these non-pharmaceutical interventions so that we reduce transmission and reduce the number of cases that we are seeing. So testing is important, but I think there's an over-focus on testing because of the numbers that we publish. There's a lot of parts of this chain that need to work for us to get on top of this outbreak. And if we keep focusing on one part of that chain, we will miss the bigger picture. Our role is to limit transmission. We limit transmission by doing those basics that we keep preaching about every single day. And until we get those basics right, we will keep seeing cases, we'll find them, and the numbers will keep rising. So we need Nigerians to stand up and support us on this fight.
Okay, two things. Some doctors say they'd like to get some clarification about this. They say recently they were under the impression that samples that Cross River State has sent to NCDC were, I think, about 10 sending to URA, which is their catchment, that is. But that they saw that the NCDC published 7. So they want to know what's going on about that particular 10 or 7. And then the second part of that same question is that In terms of communicating results to people, they are not that comfortable with text messaging. They say that that is the process that they receive these results, and they wonder, no one signs off on some of these things, and it raises more concern. Is this something that should change, or you think should change?
So, Chairman, thanks for that. You know, whether 10 have been tested or 7 really is an academic question. The question is, why should a state, since the beginning of the outbreak, if you are really serious in confirming or understanding the epidemiology or the incidence of this infection in your state, you can't have tested 10. Let's assume they've tested 10 people. And in every state in Nigeria has a population of 5 to 7 million, much more than many countries around the continent. So no matter how intensive your prevention measures are, no matter how intensively you've closed your borders, you're wearing masks, you're instituting other measures, you cannot know where you are if you don't measure. And this is not just for COVID-19. You can teach your child, you can spend every hour of the day teaching your child maths. You cannot know if he knows the maths if you don't examine his capacity. The same for every other endeavor in life. So there's no way we can know if a state is succeeding or failing in their control of this virus if they don't test. It's a simple fact of life. It's not an opinion of the head of NCDC, neither is it an opinion of anyone else. You can't know where you are if you don't measure where you are. You cannot manage what you don't measure. So in every context, until we are able to collect more samples, we will not know if these states are being successful. I want to celebrate the success of states that have managed to reduce or eliminate transmission. There's nothing that will bring me bigger joy to raise up a state as an exemplary state that managed to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 in that state. That will bring me the biggest advocacy tool I could wish for. But the only way we could do that is if they test more. This is a fact of life. And that's kind of what we're advocating for every state to support us in doing. Secondly, your second question in terms of how we transmit results to the states. Now, states are have started to listen to people and implement different approaches. There's hardly been a disease ever with such an intensive requirement for resulting as quickly as needs to happen with COVID-19. Our role here is to provide the state teams with those results. The states transmit those results. In some cases, they call every patient individually. In some cases, they're beginning now to print out those results and send it. But you know the difficulty with sending paper results. The postal system doesn't work optimally in Nigeria. Courier delivery is very expensive. So it's not as if there are many pathways to delivering results that work. Taking a picture of the result still means that you have to send it through a phone or through a smartphone. So the methods of sending by text messages is really a result of our reality, right? It's not that that is the ideal method. And people that have required a paper result will get one. So if you go back to your state team and ask for a result because you need it for whatever purpose, most states would offer that, but they're not at the moment able to print out results. Lagos confirmed 199 people yesterday, Chamberlain. So imagine printing out 199 results today, going around Lagos to the very difficult areas that you need to find. In most cases, they can't find the addresses that people offer because people are not often honest with their addresses for all sorts of reasons that I also understand. I live in Nigeria. So it's not that straightforward, printing out results and giving it to people. Not because the health sector doesn't want to do this, but because our society is limited in certain organizational aspects that we're working very hard to improve on every day. So this is the reality of our time. We live in the same context as everyone else. We can't have a system that is much better than the context in which we live in. So we're making best of the realities of our existence in Nigeria while pushing very hard to improve our circumstances every day.
Now, as we wind down on this conversation, when you say it's hard to manage what you don't measure, and I mean, referring to states, I understand that a team from the Ministry of Health and the NCDC was in Cross River State. And I'd like to find out, what did they find? Especially because, I mean, there are issues about testing, the kind of approach and all that. So what did that team find, and how is that helping in your strategy overall?
We did. There was a larger team that went on behalf of the minister and the presidential task force. You know, there are many aspects of the response that we engaged the state with. The engagement went very well, as I understand. The formal report hasn't been sent well yet, but on the aspect that concerns us the most. So we saw. And we give a lot of kudos to the state. From what I understand, Cross River State did very well implementing a lot of measures ahead of many states across the country. Kudos to them. They were aggressive in the use of masks ahead of many states. In fact, ahead of our own national guidelines. So a lot of kudos to them. So there are many aspects of this response that, you know, I would stand up and say, listen, the government of Cross River has done extremely well. However, there's no way you can know how well you have done in the outcome that matters the most if you don't measure. This is so we are encouraging Cross River and any other state in Nigeria. The only way you can determine your success in managing this outbreak is if you collect more samples and send in those samples for testing. We will keep working on our side in terms of improving the access to laboratory capacity. We're planning now on how to support Cross River with the equipment and infrastructure for a lab locally using the Gene Expert platform. So we will keep pushing on what we need to do to support the states across the country to increase and improve their testing capacity. But the only way we can ultimately know if the measures they have put in place have been successful or not is if they collect more samples from appropriate people and send them to a lab to test. I'll give a lot of kudos to states like Gombe, for instance. Gombe doesn't have a lab. They've tested close to, I think, 800 samples. There are many states without a lab that have tested many people and demonstrated that they are transparent, they want to work to create visibility around the work they're doing. And yes, if they're positives, you manage the positives. If they're positives in your state, you can't hide them forever. They will eventually emerge. So let's keep working together as one country to find out where we are in this epidemic, to drive the improvements we need to drive across the country, so that we can ultimately bend the curve, as long as we don't have a vaccine, and when we have a vaccine, ultimately stop transmission across the country.
All right, let me try and squeeze this in. Binto, we need to just go now. There are doctors hospitals, in fact, lots of people have also, they keep saying that some hospitals are not taking patients because first, they've heard, PTF saying, look, don't accept or don't take patients in and treat them for COVID if you've not been accredited or permitted or cleared to do that. So as a result of that, besides, some other hospitals say, look, we don't have any PPEs. So they're afraid to bring in patients who are not COVID patients because they say we don't know if they have got COVID. So this is posing a challenge because some other persons can get treatment as a result of this. So is the PTF, are you aware of that? What is going on about? Is there any communication to hospitals to see how this can change so that other people can get treatment if they don't have COVID?
Yeah, so Chamberlain, I think this is really a challenge. We do know there have been a lot of healthcare worker infections across the country. And so naturally, there's a lot of anxiety among doctors and nurses that manage these patients every day. So I can understand the anxiety in doctors among hospitals to admit patients that may have COVID-19, especially with the symptoms they display. So on the other hand, our responsibility as doctors is always to manage the patients that we see. We need to do that safely. There are different ways you can adapt practice in your hospital to be safe. We've advised the setting up of triage centers in front of hospitals so people can do a risk assessment for every patient. And if they are suspected to have COVID, quickly take a sample and send for testing, and triage those that are unlikely to have COVID to go into the traditional care pathways. So all I can say really on this is to encourage all doctors to remember the oaths that we took together. Work very hard to do your very best. I understand the circumstances. We're trying and working very hard to make sure that we can distribute all the personal protective equipment that we can find, we can procure, or we get from our partners. But there's no way we can fulfill the needs across the country. So everyone has to come on board on this. The private sector, excuse me, the private sector has really done well in providing us support in this regard. The UN has come forward to really support the efforts. Everyone is doing their very best, and we need to work and make the best out of what we have. We may not be in the ideal position of being able to provide all the PPEs across the country, but we will keep working very hard to protect our healthcare workers because they are the heart of the response to this outbreak.
All right, then, Dr. Chikwe Ihekweazu, DG, NCDC, thank you for talking to us this morning. And again, we wish you and your team all the best.
Thank you very much.
All right, so there you go. Yeah, still a huge where we are, the targets that we've got, and how to achieve all of those. And we couldn't get to ask him about Edo State talking about 300,000 tests in 2 weeks. I just wonder because, I mean, looking at a template from NCDC, can Edo State achieve what they say they want to achieve?
Except they want to go another route, which it's going to be tricky at this time. But overall, we've seen that states have been testing the waters, little things trying to go their way. So will this happen when it comes to tests? We don't know. But I'd like to just quickly read this one, a tweet that someone actually sent. I'm hoping the DG is still listening, from Dixon Okeda, saying, does the DG of NCDC have time to rest or sleep at all? It says, God give him the strength to pass through this. And, you know, a lot of people that are working on this, not just the DG, they are healthcare workers, those at the laboratory, security agencies, really. They've taken a lot of flack recently. But
yeah, I mean, we bug them all the time.
Yeah.
The media bug them all the time to ensure they give us information. We need to give it to the people.
Yeah.
Hey, what about us? I need to ask you if we get time to sleep as well.
I guess that's
What's
why
going on here?
the kudos was given to you by the Minister of Internal Affairs. He said that
really?
Yes, he said
I didn't know. Am I absent?
You people, you
nice.
always want to know everything about everything.
oh, that was the kudos?
Is that the kudos?
Well, at least he referenced it. I mean,
Wow.
so
He could do better. Oh, come on. I think he can do better.
Are you asking for palliatives?
Well, I didn't say so. If that's the way you internalize that message, that's even about communication. You know, you say one thing, they understand it differently. You just have to keep trying.
But
the
reason PTF COVID-19 hold the briefing every day is because they know that people want to get this information, and the only people who can get it to them is the media. So definitely that is something.
Okay, we'll be back in just a moment and bring you some other information. I know the eyes on some states. We'll talk about one of them in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're still talking about the times that we're in, the COVID-19 pandemic. We're crossing over now to Cross River State, where we've got His Excellency, Professor Ben Ayede, Governor of Cross River State, joining us this morning. Good morning, Your Excellency. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, indeed. I mean, people are always talking about these two states, Kogi and your state, as the only two states who don't have any reported or confirmed case, and thankfully so. But how are you handling your strategy in ensuring that things remain this way?
Well, essentially speaking, I'd like to also commend my colleague, the governor of Kogi State, for doing his best to keep Kogi COVID-19 free. I will have a better information on my own state and give my own perspective. As you're well aware, as soon as we started reading in the papers and watching on television globally the impact of this pandemic, what we did as a state was to quickly respond to it by locking out our states against the virus. So we actually didn't lock down, we locked out the states. and so blocked our borders immediately and commenced no mask, no movement. So that we started right on time. We are proactive, and we have continued to sustain that. But you're also aware that by virtue of our location, we're just sharing a boundary with the Cameroons. And it's such that it is almost impossible that we are still having COVID-19 case negative. But what we did was we ordered over 100 brand new vehicles, policed all our borders between Nigeria and Cameroon, including the legal and the illegal borders, ensured that we blocked all access to other states coming in or going out of Cross-River State, closed our airways. In fact, if you remember, a team of about 35 Americans flew in from the US into Cross-River, got into Lagos, got clearance to come to Calabar. I refused them landing until I got a certificate from NCDC to confirm that they were COVID-19 free. And so we've been very, very deliberate. Our structural and normative action plan is so firm. I lead from the front. I spend nights myself personally at vigil in the various entry and exit points to demonstrate to my commissioners, my special advisors, my senior special advisors and special advisors that if the governor himself can stay nights at our border points, you should do so. So our borders are being manned by only very senior government officials to ensure that there is no compromise at that point. And so I think that's the strategy that has really worked for us. Also doing tracing, surveillance, training a lot of people. We train about 400 surveillance officers every 2 weeks. So that training is so massive. And so for every single primary health center, we have enough hands to be able to go around each community, and we go to private and public health centers and hospitals. If you have somebody with this kind of symptoms, quickly alert this number. My Commissioner of Health, who is the chairman of the COVID-19 response team, very, very young and very agile, very intelligent and smart. So she works 24 hours. And so as soon as we have any reported case, we swim in immediately, pick up the patient, do the proper survey and do the surveillance, do tracing, following the persons they have had contact with, and watch them over time. And the samples we've collected so far, we have sent to the lab, and they have all returned negative. And just yesterday, NCDC and indeed Federal Ministry of Health just left here and giving us a very good pass mark. Very impressed with our laboratory, very impressed with our isolation center, very impressed with the checkpoints they've seen to enforce the nose mask, very impressed with our border closures. Indeed, they also worked very hard, and I must commend the Minister of Health. I must also commend the DG of NCDC. The team they sent here were very, very thorough, and I'm sure they are shocked at the level of sophistication of our preparedness as a state. And I will continue to sustain this until this COVID-19 pandemic is over. And I'm sure with God on our side, we shouldn't have any case at all. We're really prepared for it.
All right, but there are those who have the impression, listening to the NCDC, that the state is not testing enough, that you can't measure properly if you don't test enough.
Yes. I'm also trying to make sure that I choose the appropriate language so that I protect the integrity of NCDC and their claim for testing and what is professionally right. Let me once more again thank NCDC and, of course, the Federal Minister of Health, because if you look at what they have done in relationship to what is happening globally, they have maintained the best practice, because that is the international best practice as it is today. Looking at their response, their action, their strategy, they have absolutely done well. But as a professional, as a professor of science, I know that we are also not customizing the action plan that reflects our situation and originality. As a nation, you can't just throw money in the hands of manufacturers of test reagents just because you want to test. You only test when there's a suspicion that calls for concern. I give you an example. Responsibility of support of test kits lies with government, federal government. We've got 50 test kits. We don't know when this pandemic will end. And I just go into the street and test people when I know that the test method which is being used today lacks reproducibility, it lacks reliability. The coronavirus itself is an N coronavirus, meaning it's novel, meaning it's unknown. So its primers is synthetic. The reverse transcriptase itself is synthetic. This is not a diagnostic technique. It is just related to enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, as is used for viruses generally. And we all know that their reliability is very low. And so for you to ascribe a test on a person and to say this person is confirmed that is carrying the virus, there are certain principles in science that we must obey. Let me take one from plant pathology called the Koch postulate. For you to actually say that somebody has breath problem, difficulty in breathing, having catarrh, is coughing, is having fever, elevated body or pyrexia, you put all the various symptoms together and you say that it's coronavirus and coronavirus, the test you must perform, it's just too much. It's not just enough to do a rapid diagnostic test. The PCR is a presumptive test. And I cannot go into that generalization as a professional to do that which is being done, because out there in the Western world, there's a businessman funding all of this, making sure that they sell reagents. Indeed, my friend out of Switzerland is telling me a Chinese say he has made so much money importing reagents out of Philippines, shipping to the world. So it's turned into a full-scale business. Why would I be testing somebody who has not come in contact with somebody who's got the virus? I will only test when I have reasons to test, when I have seen symptoms. But if NCDC continues to lower the criteria just to get more people testing, I begin to wonder, because we may have to exhaust the entire account of this country to be able to support the testing regime as proposed by the new criteria so set. And I think that I cannot follow blindly. I must lead from the front because I'm exposed, I'm smart, I know what I need. Today, as I speak, if you come to Cross River State, what you can do, just go through the various hospitals, public and private, and see the statistics. Nobody can hide coronavirus incident. You cannot hide it if you have a case. So we have not seen a situation in any hospital that they have called us that we have not responded immediately. The few that have called, we have responded, collected samples, and have sent to them. 9 samples in all. Go and check across the 36 states. Not many states have submitted up to 9 samples. So testing, as it were, is just a way of just trying to show, just politically right thing to do. But I can tell you, this testing, the coronavirus, have gone econopolitical. For the US, for example, it's about their November elections. And for some businessmen, it's about more reagents, more money. But for me, it is science, it is reality. And because a wrong mentality will give you a wrong reality, I have the right mentality to do tracing, and only contact tracing can help you identify who to be tested. I cannot go to the street and test blindly. I'm a scientist, please.
Well, Your Excellency, does that suggest that in this country at the moment we're being exploited?
Of course, no doubt about that. No doubt about that at all. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. No doubt. Because I can take you through the testing method. Again, this is not a scientific platform. I could take you through reverse transcriptase, RNA conversion into DNA, its amplification technique, the electrophoresis, and tell you where all the missing gaps are. How do you get the primer, the generation of the primer as part of the test kit and its amplification process? If I pass you through the whole science, we don't have to be a scientist to see the loopholes where you can see, oh, here is the business element. Ask you a question. Why can't Nigeria produce our test kits? Why can't we? Why can't we have our own vaccination plan to produce our vaccines? Why can't we? You have professors of biology. Nigerians are endowed, very intelligent people by nature, very resilient, very hardworking. I just don't know why we can't lead Africa properly. By this time, Nigeria should prove that we can actually not just close our borders to the virus, but close our borders to the solution. Let us find our own solutions locally. The statistics shows that, in any case, Nigeria comes under the malaria endemic region. And so because there is a relationship, there is a correlation, even in the protein structure of refin versus interferon, you see that both malaria and coronavirus, they share so much in common that for us who are in the malaria endemic zone, we are naturally almost immune to the coronavirus. Indeed, even our own temperature here is such that when you sneeze, if the virus escapes, it's escaping into hellfire because it can't stand an atmospheric temperature of 32 degrees centigrade. Sometimes in Nigeria, we go up to 42 degrees. So I just sympathize with this our follow the West syndrome. And I think time has come when we must change that completely. We are really exploited as a continent. And that's why I'm happy with what Madagascar has done. Nigeria ought to do that and much better. Much, much better. We can't even cultivate Artemisinin annua to synthesize and produce artemisinin, and from where we can now produce our malaria drugs. That's very simple for my cognition. But there we are. As a country, I think that the universities feel betrayed by the government, because you can't bring back very brilliant people like Professor Andy that is brought back from Japan, working with us here in Calabar. I have actually started my own research on the production of vaccine. But again, it's not something I even want to make a big news out of it. I just wish I run a state that was a little more enabled. If you know the income of my state, then you know that I am. People are right when they call me a magician. But Nigeria is exploited. Africans have been exploited. We must shut our doors. We have our local health. We have pharmacologists. We have pharmacognostics that can actually join hands with microbiologists and professors of immunology, with the support of the federal government, setting up a vaccine production plan, and we can drive the process. If Nigeria fails, who will in Africa? And that's why they say the black man thinks only from the stomach.
Let me one moment, Your Excellency. Let me quickly take you back to something my colleague asked the other time about whether or not Cross River State is testing enough. You said that you have had to man personally with top government officials the main borders that come into Cross River State. How about the communities and what some call illegal entries into the various states that we have? Of course, you know your state is bordered by 4 states that have confirmed cases, Benue, including Benue, Akwa Ibom, and Abia State. How can you confirm that there is no single case in any of those communities when your state is bordered by 4 different states with confirmed cases of coronavirus disease?
Well, in addition to those 4 states, we also have Cameroon. And like I said earlier, we have so many illegal routes. So we did a surveillance and understood all the illegal routes, including the legal and the illegal routes, including those that you just have to walk through a stream. In fact, somewhere back in Buki, just Cameroon and Nigeria is so simply separated by a small stream that you can just walk across. All of those places are being manned. We have 38 commissioners. Each commissioner is on one border. We have about 114 special advisors. Each person is in one border post of the other, with other staff attached, plus the police, plus the civil defense, plus the Peace Corps. All of them are manning these borders. And so it is almost impossible for you to cross, except situations where we have people on essential duties that have been exempted. And when even you are exempted, you're coming in with a petroleum product, or you're coming to take petroleum product from the Cross River tank farm, we must escort you, discharge, and take you out. But again, we have challenges because you have fugitive escapes. But again, the surveillance, and in all of these points, we do your testing in terms of the body temperature and what have you. But let me come to the real issue. Testing and confirmed cases. Testing does not give you an idea of the level. Testing just gives you a spatial distribution metrics of the possibility of spread. And it's conceptual, and it is only theoretical. The reality is that if somebody is down, he's sick, and is coming down with that virus, he will not be strong enough to be struggling to cross the border, because it's so hectic to enter Cross River State. The queue is as long as your eyes can see. So for you to struggle to enter into Cross River, I'm sure you must be in a state of good health. Assuming you are an asymptomatic carrier, by the time you come through, your body temperature will show, because as soon as the virus establishes itself on you, what it will happen is that it will create the accelerated production of mucus, which will generate elevated temperature, because it will be relying on the glycoprotein. So when that happens, your temperature elevation will go up. So if you have a normal temperature, you're not sneezing, and you're healthy, and you're still being locked out anyway, I don't see how Cross River will have this virus. I don't see it. Besides, our people are very, very, very responsible. We're a very civilized state. They say, wear your mask. Everybody is putting on this mask. In fact, NCDC just left here yesterday. They have confessed to us that This is the state that has responded best in terms of public compliance, in terms of checkpoints to control, in terms of public awareness, and the drive on the vehicles, and every minute they're hearing the campaign on coronavirus. I think we're really well prepared, but I don't think people should make a mistake and say the more the testing, the more the assurance. The more the testing, the more the false positive test, the more the wrong message, the more the marketing and sales of the test kits. But that is not the true, real statistics situation of your state. You will check from the hospitals, you will check from cases that have come before you in your primary health centers. That is what you will use to know who and who to survey. Because without contact tracing, without having a relationship that connotes that somebody has come to this primary health center, and for every ward in Cross River State, we have a functional primary health center. I just recruited 2,000 primary health workers last year. So there is no part of the health center that we don't have people.
Okay, let me put this in, Your Excellency. We understand that you've allowed the churches to go back to worship. What informed that decision?
We have zero case of coronavirus. We have all our borders locked and sealed. It's not idiot-proof, but we have them locked and sealed. We're healthy. We have never closed down our economy. So the economy is doing very well. Spiritual economy. There is a need. The Bible is very clear on it. People must come together for praise and worship. It's not enough for you to have a direct communion with God. So there is no amount. What is life itself anyway? It's that you would forsake your Creator. And I think for the level of public safety we have achieved, we feel fairly comfortable and stable. And remember, we also not just say, go and start your worship. We have prescribed conditions under which that will happen, and emphasize clearly that our surveillance team, our monitoring team, our COVID-19 response team will go to every of such places of worship to ensure that there is proper ventilation, hand sanitizer, hand wash facilities provided, proper nose masks done, and respect all the protocols that is required. But I can tell you, how is the church much worse than the marketplace?
Excellency, we will come back to this conversation in just a moment, but we need to go to break, so please don't go away. All right, welcome back. It's our concluding moments with His Excellency, Professor Ben Ayade, Governor of Cross River State. Your Excellency, we'll have about 2 questions in 2 minutes. We hope we can do this. Well, you did ask federal government to lift the ban, allow the airports function because this is impacting on the economy. But then we also remember that Nigeria Governors Forum came up with a resolution where they wanted this interstate restriction of movement, of which you're part of that. So isn't that going to be negating what the NGF had agreed if the federal government were to do that?
Well, when there's a sociology to this, I just want you to have a solemn reflection on this. Since the closure of the airports, hotels across the country have literally shut down. In Calabar today, you don't have any hotel that is open because they can't even guarantee the supply, except for fuel. You can imagine those who work in those places, all out of work. Imagine those who supply food and other support services to the airlines, completely out of work. Imagine parents who have daughters and sons who depend on those daily sources of income, completely down economically. And you have continued to do this until there's a moral degeneracy in our society that you cannot have a luxurious home to produce a virtuous car. So when you send our daughters into prostitution as an alternative means of income, as our young men and women, as the young men in particular, get into criminality as a product of survival instinct, we don't realize that all of these little things add up. So you turn back and look at the provisions of Section 14, Section 2, that makes it clear that the welfare and security of citizens is the primary function of government. The welfare includes job creation, it includes food. And so when people don't have jobs, and you're shutting airlines, which is a nerve center of the people, And you do so just because you want to protect lives. But you must realize that you have to protect livelihoods. Life without livelihood creates a complete cataclysm in society because the desperation to survive will end up taking more lives. In an attempt to enforce COVID-19 lockdown has taken more lives than COVID-19 virus itself. So we must realize that there are certain things when taken to extreme become vice. The superabundance of any performance whatsoever becomes detrimental to the performer. Moderation is the rule. Set standards, develop protocols for which the airlines will operate. Intercity and interborder closure, interstate closure, yes, it's appropriate because you have a mass movement at that level and control is limited. And I agree and I stand with the Governors Forum. But aircraft, you can regulate and control who boards an aircraft. You can develop framework as guidance for who will board. And I think federal government should do that urgently. Stretching for another 2 weeks, you might do that because your federal government, you have a federal mind to order and install. But you know when the aircraft is down, you can't just go and start flying it. You have to go back through either a C check or the appropriate check. I won't board an aircraft that has been down for 1 month. I won't board it. Nobody would even allow you to fly it. And I know the Nigerian aviation is being led by a very effective minister. He will not let any aircraft unless you do the appropriate check. So look at the downtime on the aircraft, the economic loss to them, and the necessary tests to be done, and how many of such tests will be done here in Nigeria. So perhaps they have to take the aircraft abroad. So you're collapsing the economy. Okay. You are collapsing the economy, and this virus is not as dangerous, it's not in the way you would think. Our atmospheric temperature does not allow it spread at the speed that is envisaged.
Well, those are part of the controversial points because, I mean, you just saw some people asking questions about they are not quite sure because they've got other areas that are equally as hot, if not hotter, but they still have cases on an exponential level. And they also say, look, the PCR test is a valid means of testing, but unfortunately, we can't exploit some of these areas any further. Neither can we even ask about your budget. I think you cringed into Olympic merits. The masses if it's taking a hit. But we'll see if we can get more time much later to talk about these matters. But we do thank you for your time this morning, Your Excellency, Governor Ben Ayade.
Thank you very, very much. I will take you on the hot climates with high values one day. And when I do, you can ask the reason. Thank you. All
right, then. Well, there you go, guys. So that is the show today. A lot of controversies. People are already disagreeing on Twitter. Some are agreeing. So, well, that's it today. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Oso.
I'm Kayode Okikelu.
And I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.